Well, good morning, everyone. My name's Mark Lur. I'm the elementary principal. Today there's four of us on the panel. We have Dr. Leah Shai, associate principal, Minot Harrison, and Lenny Davis, both curriculum coordinators. Today is we're going to walk you through a journey of student learning. Like, how does the school demonstrate what's happening in the classroom and where your child is and how they're learning throughout the school year? So we hope that as we go through the session, you'll see examples of how learning is expressed to parents and to students. And hopefully you'll have some questions that you can put in that we can answer. We've asked you all to have some paper to jot and just kind of think and jot after each slide. If while you're thinking and jotting, something comes up and you have a question, put it in the Q&A at the bottom of your screen or at the top of the screen, depending on where your bar is. There's going to be a Q&A section, and you can put in a question. And when we see a question, we're just going to try to answer it. We want this to be an interactive session, not just us talking to you. I can imagine 1 hour of listening to the four of us talk would be quite unpleasant. So we want to have as much interaction as we can from you, and those questions and answers are the way to do it. So let's get started. What we have here is what we call a provocation. And a provocation is something that teachers use all the time to raise questions. It starts kids thinking about what we want them to learn and kind of ask questions about. Right in front of you is a report card. This report card could be a report card that I would have received some 50 years ago, or it could be a report card that your child, if they were coming from another school, would have received at some point in time. So I want you to think about, what does this report card tell you about a child and their learning journey? How much information does it really give you as you look through that lens? So take a moment, stop, jot, think about what it's telling you. And if you have any questions as to, or comments you want to make, please put them in the Q&A and we will kind of address them as we go. And again, I think we need to have some song and dance going on between these each little moments of pause. So as you're thinking and jotting and stopping, I try to explain the report card. This is a traditional report card where A's, B's, C's, all based on a percentile. Percentiles come where you take grades and you add up the scores over time and you find the average, and that average ends up being a letter grade. Not based on the specific learning, based on assessments that are given over the course of the time. The report card isn't showing what did they learn in reading or in math or in science and social studies. It really just tells you they're achieving at a letter grade at a certain level on each one of these subjects.
So as Mark pointed out, that traditional report card doesn't really capture a story of learning. It tells you a letter that somehow signifies a percentile, which somehow is supposed to signify learning that has happened. And even though as adults, because most of us have experienced a system like that, we make some meaning out of it, it doesn't actually tell us a story of learning. So to think about the story of learning that we want to be sharing, we have to start with our definition of learning here at ASIJ. So if you're a frequent attendee of our Mustang Connections, you know that we always share this because it's so important to everything we do, in not just in the elementary school, but in our entire school here. So the definition of learning for ASIJ is that learning is a personal, lifelong process that leads to change, including the ability and willingness to adapt. It is driven by curiosity and motivation, occurring in a supportive environment, rich in engagement, social interaction, and feedback. Learning is constructed in authentic contexts and results in the development of new understandings and skills for all learners. So when you think about this kind of learning, how would you put that into a percentile ranking? How could you measure like 100% of driven by curiosity? How could you measure, this is a B plus, this is like 88% learning is constructed in authentic contexts. Like you can't put a percentile ranking on that. A letter grade doesn't communicate this story of learning. So we know that to communicate about our students' learning, we have to have different methods of reporting to parents about that. And we use the word reporting, often we think of report cards, but that is only one of many different ways that we report. The next slide shows another piece that's really important to us in ASIJ, and that's that piece of deep learning. And this is how we think about learning beyond just the definition. It's this really interwoven image that has our portrait of a learner competencies, those 6 competencies referenced by those little icons in the circles, and our academic standards. And just like DNA, these two things are woven together, and it's not one without the other. It's the two working next to each other. And so we report on both of these things. For our early students in the early stages of their learning journey, it is important to know how they're building those foundational skills in the academic standards, but it's also equally important, and in some cases more important, to know how they're developing those portrait of a learner competencies. So these are the things that we try to share amongst students, teachers, and parents so that everybody understands where's the child on their learning journey, and especially so that the child understands where am I now, and where am I going next, and how am I going to get there? So today we want to share some of these ways that students are also part of this journey, along with teachers and parents.
So if you don't remember what the portrait of learner competencies are, we're just going to kind of quickly refresh your minds. The first one of the heart, we're looking at the mindset. We're looking for kids that have really, they're self-directed, they have a positive view towards learning and life. They show grit, resilience, adaptability, and always have empathy and compassion. So the work that teachers are doing they're building on those competencies. Global citizenship, so we're really looking at how do we look at things that are happening around us and look at ways we can really change and solve problems through questions and action as students work together in collaboration. Collaboration, it's skills of how do you interact. Communicating is one of them. Through collaboration, you have to be a good communicator. All these competencies really work well together to support our students as a whole growth area. Creativity, when we think of creativity, everyone thinks art, right? Thinks about music. But really, creativity is beyond, it's even more than that. It's coming up with real solutions to problems. Asking right questions, that's the work that we're doing in the elementary school. How do we get kids to ask good questions to solve real world problems? And then critical thinking, really evaluating all that information, thinking critically, thinking how to take that information and look at ways to make a difference and construct knowledge. So that's a quick wrap up of the 6 competencies, and we'll go from there.
So Seesaw is a platform where students share their learning journey. And one of the purposes of Seesaw is to create a stronger connection between home and school. And it gives you, the parents, the opportunity to see and support your child's progress firsthand, their learning journey along the way. Mark's going to share with us a screenshot taken last week of the number of Seesaw posts that were happening from teachers. You see that we had 949 posts. I'm sorry, not from teachers, but from students. 124 comments where parents were able to then interact with those posts, 190 likes. And you can see from that number 387, there were 387 visits from family members. A visual here to kind of represent the power of this tool, the number of times that students are using it, and the opportunities that parents have to see their students learning in Seesaw. We're going to take you through some of those examples now of what that might look like. Here's an example from kindergarten. In the kindergarten outdoor learning area, students are engaging in science. They're noticing how the temperature affects the state of the water. They're observing how the ice is melting in the fish tank as the temperature warms. And through this process, they're thinking like scientists. They're making observations and they're developing their critical thinking skills. Oftentimes, teachers and students are capturing their learning through a photo, and then that photo comes with an explanation of the kind of learning that is happening. In addition to the photo, teachers and students are capturing their learning often through video. You'll see that in the next slide. An example from PE. As the caption says, these students are working independently and within partners in developing their racket skills, but that actually connects to mindset and the ability they have to persevere in developing this skill. We're going to go ahead and take a look at this video. So now, not only is this sharing what the students are learning, but it's sharing how the students are learning. Learning is happening in fun and engaging ways. And you can see from the video example, it's happening in many different ways in PE with the stations. We're going to look at another example from third grade. So in third grade right now, they're actually wrapping up a unit of study on weather, climate, and climate action. And this seesaw post here is a student reflection on an experience in playing an experiential farming game. The game helped them to understand the challenges farmers face during drought and in harsh climate conditions. And the student was able to then reflect on that experience. And you can see from the comments, they're developing empathy and a global perspective, which again connects back to our portrait of a learner competency, global citizenship. The visual was actually created by the student themselves. And as students get older, the seesaw posts become more creative because the students are taking that ownership and they have a variety of different ways to actually share their learning. We want to give you a moment right now after these seesaw posts to just stop and jot. Think of ways that this might be telling a learning journey.
And if you have any questions, again, if you have any questions about what you see and hear, please put them in the Q&A. I see we have one there now.
Yeah, Mark, so I see the first question around Seesaw. So is there an expectation on how frequently we will be able to see learning shared through Seesaw? Mark, if you'd like to answer that question.
Yeah, there should be through Seesaw, different, depends on the grade level, but it should be, there's weekly posts, whether it's the student sharing or the teacher sharing of the learning. Some grade levels, grade 3, uses slide decks and they share the slide decks on a regular basis. So it varies on how they're sharing. This is one example, Seesaw being a technology purpose-built system to share information for parents. I think we'll move on from any other questions. Right, next slide.
So another way that we report out and share your child's learning journey is during our November goal setting conferences. So this is a time where your child's teacher and your child, if they're in grades 3, 4, and 5, will share their academic progress and a goal that they've set around the portrait of a learner competencies. So prior to the conferences, all teachers will work with students to identify their strengths and reflect on where they are currently at in their learning journey. So you can see in this first grade example, you can see how the students thought about what might be challenging for them as a learner, what makes their brain feel hard. They looked at reading, writing, math, in addition to the portrait of a learner competencies of communication, collaboration, and mindset. So in addition to this reflection, they also thought about their strengths in order to set their goal as a learner with you during conferences. In the next example, you'll see a second grade example where the teachers also engage students on reflecting on their strengths and challenges around academics and the competencies. And then here they work together to come up with a specific area of growth and action steps on how they might work towards that goal. In third grade, there's another example that shows action steps that they can do at school and at home. So all of these ways are things that the students do with the teachers prior to the conferences in order to share it with you. So finally, you can see a fifth grade example as well. And the kids really reflected on which skills help them grow in that specific area of the portrait of a learner competency. And then they were able to focus in on an area of growth and create action steps for that goal that they then shared with you during conferences. So when we engage students in this goal setting process, it really fosters that culture that is focused on growth and lifelong learning. It also really develops student agency in the process, and it develops students' metacognitive skills as they reflect and they grow on all their areas of growth and learning.
Another kind of conference that we do is the Leaders of Our Own Learning conferences. And last year was the first year that we started with this new type of conference. And it was amazing to see how students really were leading not just the conference, but they were leading the thinking about their learning and their reflection. So we're going to share some examples now from these Leaders of Our Own Learning conferences. I will make a note that the format of these conferences is different, a little bit different depending on the age of the student. And that's in part because of the nature of the things that they are learning. For our K-2 learners, and they're still really building the foundational skills, we think there is an important part of that piece that parents need to hear from the teachers directly to understand because of how teachers might be able to talk about that in ways that our youngest students can't yet. So students can absolutely talk about their learning, but they may not have the ways of thinking about some of those foundational skills and communicating to their parents in the same way. But they are absolutely learning about themselves as learners and using the portrait of a learner terminology and competencies to describe themselves. So on the next slide, this shows some of our older learners in 3rd through 5th grade and how they communicate with parents. So during these conferences, parents come with their child and they have stations in the classrooms. The students have prepared different kinds of reflections, different things that they're sharing with their parents about themselves. And this process is so valuable because we know that at the end of the year, they're going to go on to other classrooms, and what their teacher thinks about them or what their teacher says about their learning is far less important at that point than what they know about themselves, because they're the ones who are driving their learning through life. So this idea that learning is a personal journey, that's part of our definition of learning, that's really reflected in these Leaders of Our Own Learning conferences where students are talking about themselves. They're applying the beginning skills of metacognition to think about themselves and describe what they're good at, describe how they've grown, describe what they're still working on. They reflect back on their goals, as Mano shared from the earlier conference, the things that they've set. They've gathered evidence on that. So the next slide shows some of that. This shows a student who had a goal in communication, and that was the portrait of a learner competency. And those 4 bullet points are the 4 parts of that competency. And then they looked for evidence of how they'd grown, how had they built their communication skills, and shared these 3 examples of that. So different grades or different classes might be sharing that evidence in different ways. So some of that evidence you've already seen on Seesaw, but for the child to be able to look back and reflect on that in preparation, that's a learning process itself. I will say my son, it was in 5th grade, just as a personal story, side note to that, last year he was in 5th grade, and when he was in the Leaders of Our Own Learning conference with us, sharing all this evidence, he said to us, you know, actually, I wish that I could have somehow put as evidence my preparation for this conference, because I feel like preparing for this conference, I grew more than I did in any of these pieces of evidence. So it was him pausing and thinking back on his journey and preparing that story to share with us was where he saw the most growth. So in doing things like what we see on the screen now, students are also in the process of learning, not just preparing to tell you about their learning. The next slide shows how this might look in one of our specialist classes in music, because they're students from K through 5th grade have each of the music teachers. They'll have things prepared during those conferences so students are coming ready to talk about the learning they've done at their grade level within the Portrait of a Learner competency. So that smaller box there shows how students were using mindset, critical thinking, and creativity within the context of music. And the students are demonstrating that for parents. They're showing their musical skills, they're showing what they've learned, they're showing what they can do, and talking about that in that portrait lens. The next example is from Japanese. So also in Japanese, students are preparing, thinking about, reflecting on their learning to be able to share that with the parent. So this shows 1st grade and 2nd grade JHL students. In that planning sheet they were doing, you can see the little icons of the Portrait of a Learner, and they're thinking about themselves in Japanese class. How did I show mindset in Japanese class? How did I grow in my communication in Japanese class? How might I have grown as a global citizenship through Japanese study? And they prepared with a partner, they practiced, so they're getting that rehearsal before they share with you, and then parents would be able to share with their parents or even siblings during those Leaders of Our Own Learning conferences. The final slide shows something that many classrooms did. And again, not every classroom has the exact same activities. We don't standardize it. It needs to be authentic. That's part of our definition of learning. So based on the authentic ways that students in that grade level, in that classroom have been showing their learning, participating in the learning journey, there'll be different things that families will do. One of the things that several classes did was an exit ticket. And an exit ticket is a strategy that teachers might use in a regular classroom to kind of collect some feedback on what students have learned. It's a way for, at the end of a lesson or end of an experience, students to pause and jot down something they've learned or a question they have or a wondering, or reflect back on how they've changed. And then the teacher also has that evidence. It's not a traditional test or quiz, but it's a great way for students to be able to reflect what they've learned. And so in the Leaders of Our Own Learning conferences, this exit ticket for students was for them to reflect on that experience. How did they feel about the conferences? What went well? What are they proud of? What was a highlight? And in some classrooms, parents also had an exit ticket where they were asked, what did you learn about your child? What are you most proud of about your child? That sort of thing. So they're participating in that learning journey as well. So we're going to have another moment to stop and jot. And stop and jot also is a technique teachers might use to help students learn how to process information if they're listening. This kind of presentation is not very common in elementary school. We know that it makes it more accessible for parents who are working or live a long distance away. In the elementary classroom, there'll be very few times where they have an adult just talking at them for a long time. But when they need to pause and think and reflect, stopping and jotting down some notes about what they're wondering, what they've learned, what has stood out to them is a way to hold on to that thinking. So thinking about these two different types of conferences that we've shared on, what do these conferences tell about the story of learning? And if any of your wonderings that you're jotting down are questions, please feel free to add them in the Q&A. If you have something that you just want to share out, you also can do that using the chat function. Thanks, Nikki, for your comment. She added, she said, not a question, but I love the exit ticket idea. What a nice way to wrap up conferences, which back in my elementary school day could sometimes be very stressful. I will say it was so nice to see the wonderful things that parents were saying for their students, and for students to be able to celebrate that even as a whole class, to see what their friends' parents were saying and celebrating about their learning. Really, it was a beautiful thing. Does anybody else have a question about the conferences or would like to share out? If you come up with a question, feel free to jot it in the Q&A as we continue with the presentation.
So another way that we share out about your child's learning journey is through a classroom newsletter. So every 2 weeks, you'll receive some sort of communication from your child's teacher that shares part of their learning story. Most of the time, this will come in an email, but it may also come in Seesaw as a message. So in addition to posts that your child is making in Seesaw, the teacher can send the newsletter through the message part of Seesaw. This class newsletter will highlight many of the learning experiences that are happening in your child's class. So as you can see in this 2nd grade example, This teacher is sharing how the academic skills and experiences that the child is engaging in helps them to develop the portrait of a learner competencies. So on the left, you can see global citizenship. And then on the right, they've explained how the children are reading and writing and exploring the properties of matter and how they impact our Earth, and about like sustainable toys in order to develop global citizenship within their classroom. In addition, they talk about how they're developing their collaboration skills while working on foundational math concepts. So they kind of explain that. And then overall developing their ability to communicate through storytelling during their writing units. So in this next example, this is a 5th grade example of a class newsletter. This teacher shared how the students in 5th grade are developing their critical thinking, their communication, and collaboration skills through their debate unit. So they kind of emphasize how the students are exploring issues around ASIJ in order to select an issue that they're going to research and debate. So they'll develop their research skills, their critical thinking skills by analyzing sources, and then eventually coming together to use public speaking skills to share these with their class. So the teacher has emphasized these all in their newsletter. So if you just want to stop and jot again, what story of learning does this tell? And if you have any questions or comments, feel free to put them in the Q&A box.
So we wanted to share with you more examples of how students are sharing their learning journey through reflection. And as a school, we really value reflection because we know that when our students are continually reflecting on their learning, they're developing those skills in metacognition and they're fostering agency. And teachers are providing many different ways for students to reflect on their learning throughout the school day. We want to share with you a few more examples. This first one coming from music again. This was a Seesaw post as well. After a learning experience, the students were selecting the portrait of a learner competency that they were developing through that lesson, and they were connecting to how they were showing that in a musical way. Again, the opportunity for them to reflect on what they were doing well. This particular student felt like they were staying on beat and things that they could get better at for next time, thinking about tempo. And the more opportunity for them to really reflect specifically how those skills they develop are connecting to the portrait of a learner competency. And the next example coming from 5th grade, which is a part of their debate unit they're doing right now, finishing a first part of the debate unit, wrapping up with a Socratic seminar, which is one of the structures that the 5th grade teachers use to help students to develop those critical thinking skills and those speaking skills. The Socratic seminar is getting them, preparing them for a final debate towards the end of the unit. And you can see from this student, they had the chance to really reflect on how they were feeling. You notice at the beginning, they're feeling with the emoji there. Maybe they were feeling a little nervous, a little uncertain. But after this experience, they were feeling very positive about it. They had the opportunity to share that in words and also think about ways that they were defining success for themselves in this situation. How did they feel successful? One more example as well. This one is from 2nd grade. This is actually a part of a writing piece that the students were engaged in. The success criteria column there was probably something the students were helping the teacher to help co-construct, to co-create. And it was very clear for the students what their story was to include as far as the structure and the details. And it gave the students the opportunity to reflect on their writing and where they felt they were at in their writing development. You see a portion of this reflection also for them to provide comments, maybe some evidence of how they've grown in their writing. So again, more opportunities for our students to share their learning through reflection. Again, we'll pause and consider, what story of learning does this student reflection tell? Again, if you have questions, if you have comments, we'd love to have those in the chat.
So this is a technique that teachers use. It's counting to 10 before we move on. When you ask a question, that moment of silence that takes place when a question is kind of thrown out there and you're looking for engagement, and you pause, and the room is dead silence, and it's really uncomfortable sometimes, but we're going to move on. If you have questions, please put them in the question and answer. Next, we're going to talk a little bit about the report card. Today, report cards are being sent home around 3:30. The report card is what we're trying to show you is really just a snapshot of learning that's taken place over the course of the whole semester. As Leah shared in the start of the session, that we really focus on melding or weaving in the standards with the competencies. And so the report card is set up in a way in which it has recognition of the standards, but also in the writing aspect of the report card, it really focuses on the competencies with the standards together. So as you look at your child's report card today, you want to look at it through the lens of these are the standards, and we assess the standards through a key of beginning, approaching, achieving. Our standards are at end-of-year benchmark. What does that mean? It means that there's a lot of learning going on throughout the year, and a standard could be assessed multiple times throughout the year, and the expectation is by the end of the year, the child will be achieving. And so the learning journey throughout the year takes place, and that so at mid-year might not be the place where that journey has ended, right? Journey takes place for the whole year. And so we've created a report card that there's a column that's shaded, and that shaded piece on the report card is really telling the parent, well, this is in the student, this is really where the child should be. Some students will be still in the beginning, some will be in the approaching, and some will be in achieving, depending on how they have demonstrated mastery of that standard. All right. And so as you receive your child's report card, think through that lens. If the box is gray and your child is on where it's gray, then you're basing it on the growth within that period of time. Unlike the traditional report card we looked at in the beginning of the year, an A is finite. That's their final grade. It's averaged out. In a standard-based process, standards can be demonstrated at any time throughout the year, and the teacher can make note of that achievement over the course of the year. So don't think as A's are the endpoint of learning. Standards, it's different. The learning goes on throughout the year. Achieving can occur at any moment. It could be at the beginning of the year. It could be at the end of the year. But it varies, and it progresses throughout the whole time. Here's an example. So in this report card, the standards, the reading standards, comprehension, craft and structure, integration, knowledge, reading range, they're all in the gray area. That's where we expect all students to be. We don't expect all students to be at achieving, but we expect them to be at approaching. Now, in this case, in some areas, this student is achieving, and that's fantastic where they are, and it's up to the teacher to continue to move them forward from that achieving point to continue to learn and grow. Whereas other students might be in the beginning, and that's also good. It's okay to be there because, again, as we look through the lens of a year, there's still a half a year left for that student to become achieving. So it shouldn't be a red flag. It's just a really quick snapshot of where your child is in their journey. all the things that we've shared from the start of this presentation are other examples where you can see where your child is and how they're doing within their learning for the semester. The next section is the narrative part, where the teacher really tries to describe their intersection of the standards and the competencies. So through learning how to read, the student is also becoming a critical thinker. Or they might be showing mindset, because it takes perseverance to be a good reader. You need to practice. You need to try to struggle, right? And so the teacher tries to capture that in the narrative comment to give you a better picture of how your child is achieving both competencies and the standards. As you read through this, and we'll give you a minute to read some of it, it's really telling the story of how those standards support those competencies. And through the experience of the standards, the student is building their skills in those competencies. All right, so as you read quickly through this, you'll see the intersection. In mathematics, the child is thinking with math critically. So the math is there, they're learning math, but through that learning of math, they're really becoming better critical thinkers and collaborators in the work they're doing, because the experiences that they're taking part in the lesson. Let's give a moment. Again, the stop and shot. I hope we have some questions on this, because report cards are often a big question mark with parents. When we get feedback, that's one of the big questions. So if you have questions, this is a perfect time to put them up on the Q&A, and we'll do our best to answer. One thing you might notice if you're reading through this comment, at the end of this comment, the student has reflected on their goal. It says, my goal is to think critically and to be able to evaluate mathematical questions. And in this case, this child thinks that they've done a pretty good job in that space, but they still have some more room to improve and grow. And so they're trying to do that in all subjects. So that's a reflection with the student that has been added onto the report card. So you get a combination of the teacher seeing where the child is in a narrative, and in this case, and not in all classes, but in this case, the teacher has placed the student's reflection on there.
So one of the best reports on your child's learning journey is to have a conversation with them at home. As a parent of a second grader and a fifth grader, I'm sure we've all been there. How was your day? Good. What did you learn? Nothing. What was fun? Recess. But I find that when I actually engage my child in questions that kind of embody the competencies, I get so much more information out of them. So if I ask them, can you tell me about something that was challenging for you today? What risk did you take as a learner today? How did feedback help you learn today? How did you work with others today? What did you learn today, and why do you think that was important? What challenges did you have with working with others today? So when I use these questions with the stuff that is being sent home from teachers in the newsletter, from stuff that's posted on Seesaw, my child is then able to elaborate, and then I can kind of dig into their learning and who they are and what's challenging and what's successful for them as a learner. So we just encourage you to use the information that is being sent home to engage in these conversations with your child so they can be their reporters of their learning journey.
Are there any other questions? Hopefully there's some questions, some kind of thought, wonderings that you might have in regards to what we shared today. What we're trying to do is really show that the report card isn't really the full learning journey. There's a lot of learning that's going on over the course of the year. a lot of sharing from the teacher, a lot of sharing from the student as to their journey that's taking place. And we want you to kind of start to recognize why there's a parent letter going home every week, and those seesaw posts that ding your phone, if you have it on your phone, why they're there, the purpose of it, and how you can use that, all that information to gain greater insight with your child through questions. Maybe at the dinner table, maybe at the drive home, maybe the drive to the ski mountain. Lots of different ways to engage your child. We have 2 questions though. Leah, you want to jump on the questions?
Sure. The first one is a comment. Thank you, Ling, for the comment that the questions are fantastic. You know what, Mark, sorry, I'm making an offer that I haven't confirmed with you, but we can attach that to our Mustang bulletin. So today we'll put it in the parent letter, another plug to read our letter. So in the bottom of the Mustang bulletin, you'll see it has the sections for each division. And when you click on the ES one, we have the letter from us, and we'll put those questions for you to ask at home so you have that resource that you can use. And then a question about the report card comments. I love how the report card incorporates student comments. Will kindergarten report cards be like this too, as they were with the beginning of the year conferences, if I recall correctly? So yeah, good recollection. In November, when we had the conferences then, and the students all had, they're part of a goal setting process, and their voice was reflected on that. That will be reflected again when they do their Leaders of Our Own Learning conference. The student voice is really leading in that part of it. For the report card comments, that's something that's not standard across all grade levels or classrooms, whether the student is quoted on that. So in the example we saw in 5th grade, where the students are a little bit older and their reflections may be more indicative of the specifics of learning that are going on compared to what a 5-year-old might capture with limited space in the report card comments. They don't always have the students' comments on the report cards, but you will absolutely see the students' comments again in the Leaders of Our Own Learning conference. And I should make a note about that. The accuracy of kids' reflections, I know I sort of threw little kids under the bus. I've got a 1st grader at home. Sometimes she says things that blow my mind at how spot on they are. And then sometimes, because of her age, she says something that's totally out there. And we recognize developmentally that our younger learners are not always going to be accurate, but for them, a lot of it is about engaging in the process, right? In the same way that when they're in PE, they're playing basketball, and a lot of them aren't going to get it all the way up to the hoop, but they are playing, they're learning, they're engaging in it, and they're seeing that as a thing that basketball players do. And as they practice and get better, their aim becomes more accurate, and they can improve as a basketball player in the same way as a learner thinking about themselves, thinking about their own reflections. They will become more useful in terms of accuracy as they grow, but the process is so important. So if you have a child who's reflecting on their learning and they say something and you think that actually doesn't seem accurate, rather than challenging the accuracy of it, approach that with curiosity. Ask them, why did you say that? Or what makes you think that way? And you'll probably hear incredible insights into how your child thinks about themselves that are more enlightening than if your child had just accurately said something about themselves and what they learned. So in those conversations, particularly with the young kids, try to engage in that with curiosity. I do see another question. Since we don't have any parent-teacher conferences around this time, if we have any question about a report, do you recommend we ask teachers individually? Yes, the teacher is the best person to reach out to. So if you see something in the report card that you don't understand or you're not sure what it means, send an email to the teacher. It might be something that has a quick clarification. If it's something that needs more in-depth conversation, then the teacher can engage in that with you, but they're the best person to speak to about that. Thanks for asking.
Another question is, we just moved up. What kind of conversations will be held with a student, or feedback will be given when his or her self-reflection is not necessarily the same as the teacher's observation? That's a really good question, right? So that's, again, they're not one-offs. They're conversations that are occurring all through the year. And I think if you read your child's comment from the teacher, often they'll make reference of what they're still working on. And those are when the student's reflection might be a little bit different from the teacher's reflection. But it's really just nudging them forward to really look at themselves as learners, that building that thinking about themselves and how they can improve. I want to learn because I want to learn. We're really trying to build that capacity within all students. And so as a teacher has that, tell me about your goal or your growth area and how have you worked on it? And the teacher, the student says, I'm an expert already. I know everything. I'm doing fantastic. The teacher will ask for evidence. Like, tell me more. Tell me where can you share some of that, where you're learning, where you're sharing that with me so that we can make that connection together. So there's really a partnership that really is formed between the teacher and the student. Just like it should be a partnership between the parent and the student, your own child. Nikki, I go back to the kindergarten thing as you asked that question, and I was sharing with a panelist today, and I was the kindergarten teacher was sharing an example of collaboration that was taking place in the classroom. It's posted in Seesaw, or will be posted in Seesaw if it's not yet, but it demonstrates these kids talking to each other and asking each other questions and solving a problem, trying to collaborate to solve a problem. And through that lens of watching them, there's so much feedback that's being given back and forth between the two students, and you as the parent can be watching to see the growth in your own child through those observations. So Seesaw is a wonderful place to really capture a lot of that learning. The parent letter that gets sent home every other week, in some cases every week, depending on the teacher. Those are the question forming locations where you can start formulating your questions from what the teacher is sharing. So I don't know. I don't see any more questions. I'm going to give it another 10-second count. Someone has any more questions? If not, we'll say goodbye in 10 seconds. All right. As always, know that our doors are always open. Our emails are always active. Please, if you have questions after this session, you said, oh, I wish I would have asked this, or maybe I didn't feel comfortable to ask this question, please send them to us. We're happy to give you some answers and build clarity, I hope, around that journey that your child or your children are going through in the elementary school. I hope this session was helpful to all of you, that you can now kind of take what's being sent home, because I know as a parent, you receive all of these emails, all this information, and you're not always sure what you can do with it. And I think Minot's questions that she added on the end could help to generate greater conversations at home. Because in the end of the day, what's on paper really doesn't matter. It's really what thinking that your child is doing and where they're thinking they're learning, and it's building their capacity to be a learner. And that comes really through conversations, not a report card. So again, thank you all for being here today. I appreciate it. And thank you, panelists, for doing an amazing job sharing your thinking. Have a great day.